Welcome to The World Today. It's the 37th day of the murder trial of South African athlete Oscar Pistorius, and a sports doctor has told the hearing that the double amputee has been greatly affected by his disability. Wayne Derman told the court in Pretoria that the Paralympian suffered significant stress and anxiety. Mr. Pistorius says he shot his girlfriend River Steenkamp after mistaking her for an intruder in their house last year, but the prosecution argues that he killed her deliberately after a row. An issue is the athlete's state of mind at the time of the shooting. On Monday, however, the court heard he was not suffering from a mental disorder when he shot Miss Steenkamp. According to a psychiatrist's report, the 27-year-old Mr. Pistorius is capable of distinguishing between right and wrong, and so should bear criminal responsibility for his actions. The court also heard a psychologist's assessment on Wednesday, which found that he had post-traumatic stress disorder and since the shooting and could be a suicide risk. Wayne Derman, a professor of sports and exercise medicine at the University of Cape Town, was the final witness called by the defense. In continuation of our focus on Africa, Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, has once again come under attack as militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab says it shot dead a prominent member of parliament in the capital. Ahmed Mohamud Hayad was killed in a drive-by shooting after he left his hotel in a heavily policed area. Witnesses say his bodyguard was also killed and a parliamentary secretary wounded in the shooting. Al-Shabaab, which is linked to Al-Qaeda, has vowed to step up attacks during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. It lost control of Mogadishu to a 22,000-strong African Union force in 2011, but has continued to carry out bombings and assassinations in the city. The Al-Qaeda-linked group wants to establish an Islamic state in Somalia. We're in East Africa now, where the police in Uganda have stepped up security in the capital Kampala following a specific threat of a planned attack on its main international airport. The airport security office said the attack planned for this evening could not be taken lightly. The U.S. advised its citizens to review plans to travel through Entebbe International Airport today. Militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab bombed 2 restaurants in Kampala during the 2010 Football World Cup. More than 70 people were killed when suicide bombers targeted patrons watching football on TV. Now, British aid agencies have warned that some 4 million people in South Sudan are likely to face critical food shortages over the next month. But the Disasters Emergency Committee says the cost of mounting an appeal to pay for aid might outweigh the donations they're getting. South Sudan's president has already warned of one of the worst famines ever. More than 1 million people have fled their homes since fighting erupted between different factions of South Sudan's ruling party last December. Thousands have now died in the conflict that started as a political dispute between South Sudan's president, Salva Kiir, and Riek Machar, his sacked deputy, but it escalated into ethnic tension. Now, the Disasters Emergency Committee, which brings together 13 UK charities to deal with the international crisis, says it currently has less than half the money it needs to prevent the growing food crisis in South Sudan from turning into a catastrophe. And what could be a catastrophe is a growing number of deaths resulting from the spread of the Ebola virus. African ministers and health experts are meeting now in Ghana for a second day to deliberate on how to stop the biggest ever outbreak of the Ebola virus from extending its deadly reach further. The World Health Organization has warned that drastic action is needed to halt the killer in its tracks. It reports that there have been 759 cases so far, including 467 deaths in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia as of June 30. The outbreak began in March this year. Now, this makes it the largest in terms of the number of cases and deaths, as well as geographical spread of the disease.
WHO Regional Director for Africa.
Regional health ministers say West African states lack the resources to battle the world's deadliest outbreak of Ebola, but deep cultural suspicions about the disease remain one of the biggest obstacles to halting its spread. The minister spoke on the sidelines of a global public health conference that aims to formulate a strategy to overcome an epidemic responsible for the deaths of 467 people in Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. Earlier, the Red Cross in Guinea said it had been forced to temporarily suspend some operations in the country's southeast after staff working on Ebola there were threatened by a group of men armed with knives. The threats against the Red Cross in Guinea is the latest in a series against health workers. A Médecins Sans Frontières center was attacked by youths in April after staff were accused of bringing the disease into the country. That suspicion has made it harder to isolate patients with a highly infectious disease from their communities and facilitated the spread of the virus. Liberia's Deputy Health Minister Bernice Daw said the problems were intrinsic to people's attitudes.
Our biggest challenge is denial, fear, and panic. People are very much afraid of the disease. People do not believe they are afraid, but they do not believe it exists. And so because of that, people get sick, the community members hide them, they carry them to praying places. Burial practices is a very big one, especially for us in Africa.
Sierra Leone faces many of the same issues as neighboring Liberia, with dozens of suspicious victims evading treatment, complicating efforts to trace cases. The outbreak has left some of the world's poorest states with porous borders and weak health systems undermined by war and misrule, grappling with one of the most lethal and contagious diseases on the planet. Ghana, along with other West African states, is concerned about the epidemic and has taken preventive measures even though there are no recorded cases on its soil.
We would like to appeal to our development partners, as has been reiterated by the Director for Africa, to come to their aid, their support the three countries, especially financially, so that they can, procure the needed drugs and the procurement of the needed protective clothing to support the health personnel that are fighting the Ebola virus.
Ebola causes fever, vomiting, bleeding and diarrhea and can kill up to 90% of those it infects. Highly contagious, it is transmitted through contact with the blood or other fluids of infected people or animals.
Well, back here in Nigeria, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency in Anambra State in southeast Nigeria has arrested 4 suspects in possession of several kilograms of Indian hemp. The NDLEA commandant in Anambra State, Mr. Sule Momodu, explains that the Drug Enforcement Operation Team embarked on a house-to-house search in order to arrest the suspected criminals.
This is Obosi in Idemili North local government area in Anambra State. It has over time turned a notorious haven for drug peddlers and criminals. Recently, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency launched an offensive against suspected drug peddlers in the area. At the home of this suspect, several kilograms of Indian hemp were recovered. She denies any family link to this trade.
So, what is this? Huh? You don't know this? You don't know that this is Indian and Igbo? You don't know? Are you seeing it for the first time? Huh?
So that's my problem.
What?
I don't know.
I don't know. You don't know how it came to your place?
After a number of arrests, the NDLEA forces then stepped up a stop-and-search operation where more suspects were nabbed.
Fighting drugs is the beginning of fighting crime because drugs gives the impetus to criminals to commit crime. And once we can cut off this supply, which drug law enforcement is all about, I am sure we will record appreciable impact on the life of our people in terms of security.
From the records, 25 suspects have been convicted and sentenced to varying jail terms, while over 40 cases are pending at the court of law.
When we come back after the break on The World Today, we'll be checking in on other stories making headlines around the world, including a new security upgrade in U.S. airports. Please join us again. Welcome back. You're watching The World Today with me, Amarachi Ubani. Now, amid worsening tension in the West Bank, the funeral of the young Palestinian boy abducted and killed in Jerusalem has been delayed. That's to enable doctors to carry out a post-mortem examination on his body. However, Mohammed Abu Qadir's father says he hopes his son's burial could still take place much later. His murder on Wednesday raised tensions amid claims he was in revenge for the killing of 3 Israeli youths last week. Officials say 10 Palestinians were injured when Israel carried out airstrikes on Gaza earlier today. Israel's airstrikes were in response to mortar and rocket fire from the Palestinian militants.
Israel struck over 15 Hamas targets in Gaza overnight in response to constant rocket fire launched from the Strip. The Israeli army added that since Wednesday, over 20 rockets were fired at southern Israel and that the targets hit in Gaza included weapon storage facilities and rocket launchers. Tension has been high across the region after the body of an adopted Palestinian youth was found in Jerusalem on Wednesday, raising suspicions he had been killed by Israelis avenging the deaths of 3 abducted Jewish teens. News of the discovery of 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Qadir, who was last seen being bundled into a van earlier in the day, triggered clashes between Palestinians and